First off, I don't have all the details. There is obviously a greater story here, a bigger picture, and I've only had a small glimpse of it. An experience which lasted for only a few short minutes, with the event constituting maybe 45 seconds in total. But I can't explain what happened in those 45 seconds. I can't wrap my head around it or reconcile it with what I know about the world and life. Specifically, the potential for life's development when not checked by some ever-present environmental stressor or predator. Life grown to horrifying, chaotic proportions. A few days ago, I got a call from my brother out in Arizona, asking if I wanted to come over and visit, maybe do a little bit of hiking, eat at some local Mexican restaurants he thought that I would enjoy, etc. and so on. He had just gotten some big bonus at work and wanted to spend it on some good old brotherly time. Luckily for me, I had a few vacation days saved up at work, so I agreed and took the necessary time off. Nothing of interest happened on the way there, and we met up without any real issue. He showed me around Phoenix, Tempe, and Chandler, and treated me to some of the food. 2 days went by and we branched out in our explorations of the state, visiting Sedona and a few other areas. I was set to leave on the 3rd when he suggested that we end my stay by doing something outside. Now, we had already gone hiking, but he wanted to do another outdoorsy type of thing, since he knew that I wouldn't be able to when I went back home, where the weather was still snowy and very rainy. We had found a decent place to camp for a day in southern Arizona, somewhat near the border, not far off from where we had hiked just the day before. With Arizona being a desert, there was plenty of land and open space for us to spread out our stuff and relax. The drive there, which lasted for a couple of hours, gave us some time to chat and catch up, and listen to the few bands that we mutually enjoy. We brought the usual camping supplies: tents, food and water, flashlights, flares, a radio, etc. It was only for one day, an evening and a night really, so we only brought the basic or the cheapest necessities. His truck was parked about a half a mile away from the campsite to preserve the camping atmosphere while keeping it at a reasonably accessible and visible distance. We spent most of the evening just talking and catching up on anything we had uncovered the first 2 days, and eating the leftover food that we had saved from the past restaurant dinners. There was no one else out there that we could see, and the nearest road was about 2 miles from where we had parked the car. It was mostly flat desert in every direction, a cozy desolation. Around 10 p.m., just after we had finished dinner and gathered up of our trash, we both saw something off to the north, about a half a mile away from the campsite. A mound in the desert, but one that moved, seeming to inch toward us every few seconds. Not continuously, but in steady, slow lurches. as if the energy or effort for each motion needed to be mustered. The mound was the same color as the sand, but even from the distance that we had initially spotted it, we could tell that it wasn't made up of sand. The surface, while sand-colored, was fuzzy, in a way that was highly uncomfortable to look at for more than just a few seconds. I remember turning to my brother and seeing him wince and to rub at his eyes. I had had the urge to do the same. For whatever reason, a mixture of awe and fear, maybe, we had stayed put. We didn't move until the thing was only a few yards away from us. At that distance, the size of the thing finally registered to me. It was huge, an immense body that towered right over us. I'm sure that the sheer flatness of the entire area made it seem larger than it really was. But sitting before it, looking up at this wall of uncanny fuzziness, really gave the impression of its enormity. I've spoken with my brother several times since this had happened, and each time we try to recall and describe the thing, we just come up with new descriptions. Not necessarily new details, but new forms, structures. We generally tend to settle on the admittedly odd description of a huge and dry washcloth, one that's been thoroughly used and left out for quite some time, scaled well beyond usable proportions. A haphazard shape, not necessarily formless, but spread out. Another description, one that I had offered, was a hideously blossoming flower. The ugly petals unfurled, some larger than others, but without any uniform center. There were no eyes, no feelers, an antenna, or identifiable sense organs, only the massive, ever-mobile body. If given the means, the easiest way I could replicate the thing's overall structure would be if I were to take a ball of light brown clay or dough, pull at it in every direction, and then insert tiny, almost microscopic pins all over its surface, thousands of them, and then somehow make those pins vibrate and give the dough itself a sort of buzzing, almost breath-like animation. Okay, I know it sounds ridiculous, but that's honestly the clearest idea that I can give to you. The best reproduction of how the thing idled. We both stared at it without speaking, feeling something more than just basic fear. When it got really uncomfortably close, I felt sick. Not queasy or nauseous, but more like delirious. As if being in close proximity with it had caused some sort of sudden neurological issue. While I didn't recognize it at the time, looking back now, I am certain that my mind had simply been unable or independently unwilling to fully grasp the thing's appearance. It was so unusual, so unprecedented. One of the parts, the tentacles, the tendrils, even the more general term, appendages, all feel weirdly inaccurate. They drifted by me in what could have been a missed attempt at contact, or simply another motion of self-propulsion, and I felt the space around me shift, get pulled away in the wake of the part. I was suddenly aware, acutely, intimately aware of the space that I occupied. Somehow became highly sensitive to the particles or whatever, and noticed palpably how the stuff of that space had been drawn away from me. This interaction, phenomenon, whatever you want to call it, scared me more than the sight of the creature itself. The revelation that it could somehow subtract or just brush aside the elements, the essence of the air. It was absolutely terrifying. I heard my brother utter and then quickly stifle a cry and turned toward him just in time to see the passage of another part over his head. This one much larger than the one had swept by me. The thing was now over us, and I expected to find teeth or a gaping maw or something like that beneath it. I think at the time, I had mentally associated its appearance with that of an octopus or a starfish, some multi-legged, water-inhabiting creature. But having thought about it a lot, I can confidently say that neither are close enough for a worthwhile comparison. Their anatomies are too ordered, but there was just more of the same beneath it. More of that pulsing, buzzing, prickly flesh, which was so disconcerting to look at, since it hadn't tried to eat or attack us. I got the idea that maybe it couldn't see or sense us, so I turned to my brother and mouthed, "Don't move." He didn't nod or mouth anything back, but it was obvious that he had already decided to stay still, likely out of sheer terror. We've had our disagreements about the exact amount of time that we spent beneath it. Both agree that it was the thing's passage it took between 20 and 45 seconds. It had felt much longer than 20 seconds to me, maybe because I was so hyper-aware of it, of its bizarreness in relation to myself. I think my brother had been numbed to his perception of time while the thing had passed over him. It had obviously affected us differently. I didn't turn around immediately. I actually waited several minutes before even turning to my brother. When I did, I saw him breathing slowly, rhythmically, obviously trying to calm himself down. I, on the other hand, was weirdly relaxed, at least in an immediately physical sense. Terrified, sure, but I had been so thoroughly scared by the thing's unwholesome and unprecedented nature that my mind essentially said, "Screw it," and it put me into a kind of blissfully apathetic state. Like, why even worry? Why waste the effort to be hysterical with something like that roaming around? Why run? You'll just die tired. When we finally turned around, there was nothing to be seen. Just the same flat desert that we had gazed upon earlier in that day. I saw the truck, just where we had parked it, and that was the only sizable thing in sight for miles. The sand before and behind was disturbed. It was as if something inordinately large had rolled, crawled, and swept by. All of the actions at once, but there were no droppings and no slime. Nothing to specifically, empirically attest to the creature's presence. We actually spent the rest of the night out there, speaking to one another only when we needed something, a bottle of water, a bag of jerky, etc. We had brought a radio, but neither of us had bothered to use it. I had my earphones, but didn't take them out or use my phone for anything. Having just witnessed something so profoundly weird, there wasn't anything in the internet that could have amused, entertained, or intrigued me. We both for hours sat in silence. I remember sleeping, but couldn't tell you if I ever dreamed. My brother never mentioned dreaming on that night either. In the morning, we packed up our things, quietly walked back to the truck, and then drove back to his house. We had a farewell breakfast at a diner not too far from the airport, and then I flew back home. We didn't discuss the experience until almost a week later, both having needed time to process our thoughts. It wasn't like seeing a wild animal, or a car crash, or a building collapse, or anything worldly, mundane. There is an element of the unreal to it, something beyond the natural order of the earth and man's own creations. But at the same time, the thing had seemed so comfortable with our world, so relaxed and assured of its place among a planet of insects, wolves, starfish, and humans. I don't know what we saw, but I do know that that's probably the last time I'll ever visit Arizona.